Collins, Councillor Geddes and Councillor Witts. So thanks for coming on, and we'll benefit from your experiences and things in the future. And as today, I would also like to put on record our thanks for the members who have left the committee, who are Councillor Maitland and Councillor Mail. I think their contribution helped us in the journey we've had so far, and we look forward to the journey as we go along. Can I remind everyone that this meeting will be recorded, and the recording will subsequently be available for public listening. If we move on to the agenda now, item 1, Sederunt, and apologies.
Good morning, everyone. Today we have 9 members present, and I have apologies from Councillor Karen Crothers and Councillor Brodie.
Item 2, declarations of interest. No. Item 3, minute of meeting of 24th of June. The minute was through full council. It's here for noting. Councillor Prentice.
Minor detail in the minute, Chair, on page 21. I never noticed it at full council, to be honest, but I was not at East Renfrewshire Council. I'm down here as having been at East Renfrewshire. On page 21.
Right, well, that's on the report, but we'll change it when it comes to that. Councillor Witts.
On the same matter, Chair, it was me, I believe. I didn't, in the journey from Paisley to Giffnock, I didn't morph into Councillor Prentice, much as I admire him, but that was me, I presume.
Right, with that, can we accept the minute as noted? And we'll move on to item 4, Burns Statue Improvement Project Review, report by Director of Planning and Environment Services. As you'll see, this report has came to us because it was referred to us by the Planning and Environment Services Committee, and is the first report we have considered for this aspect of our remit. So we have Ewan Green with us today to take us through the report, add anything that needs to be added, then we'll have the opportunity to go into debate and ask some questions. Councillor Crothers.
Just on your remark there, because it's something when I read the report had entered my own mind in regards to this is the first report. You could just can bring it. I take it from what you're saying there. There's got to be more reports depending on the outcome of today.
Well, my understanding is the first time we've had this one through. I can't remember any other ones that have came through from committees. However, they should be doing their own work first and then sending it to us. It's maybe just the case that this will be the first and last that hasn't been through the proper process. This sort of came through because it was referred to us before we put in the new criteria. So there will be ones coming, but they will have been through a committee process, and then it'll be up to us to look at the sort of strategic view.
I was more referring to the level of information that was contained within here, what had happened, and the possible outcomes, how we'd actually go through that. And obviously, this is almost like it's here almost in a rubber stamping type of process, I would have said. When you look at it, the recommendations there, we note the findings of what's in the appendix, but they're not our findings. They're not independent from the actual department, and that's more the point I was getting to.
I must admit, I've been through it, and there's some issues in here. I don't think we should be rubber stamping, that's one thing for sure, and hopefully can draw that out as the debate goes forward. Right, Mr. Green.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, I think members will be aware of the project, and in the report we've covered just on the 3.5 just what the aims of the project were, and that was as agreed by the then Planning, Housing and Environment Services Committee in July 2013. And thereafter, following that approval, we set about the procurement process to tender the contract and then deliver. And what we have provided here in the report is an overview of the project management arrangements, and that's mainly covered in 3.5 and 3.6. The lead service being the Planning, Environment Services, Economic Development, although very close, a number of other services across the council working very closely, most notably DG Design and that encompassed the support from Gillespie's, who are the retained external advisors we have for in terms of design, urban design specialism. As a result of the referral and just in general trying to set some good practice, we held a review workshop with officers, and that was really about going back to the start of the project and a full review supported by the Chief Executive Service to run that workshop. And the outcome of this report really talks through what the key findings were in relation to project management and the review of project development delivery. So I think we've been fairly candid in saying there are some findings that were challenging and perhaps could be seen as being slightly negative, but also there were some very strong positives coming out of the project and the work we've done. So the report covers both of these, and then in the appendix provides you with what we've called a record of lessons learned, essentially an action plan capturing some improvements that we feel we can put in place to mitigate against some of the challenges coming forward again, and linking into the emerging good practice coming through the corporate reviews that are ongoing. So that's an overview of the report, Chair, and happy to take questions.
Councillor Dykes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ewan. Can I just ask a couple of questions, please? But my first question would probably be, in the procurement process, at what stage did you consult with the procurement department within the council? So, I mean, we have a team of procurement experts. So, at what stage in the process did you consult with them, if you did at all?
Well, certainly the procurement team would be aware of the project and the Highland discussions we have around capital spend, and certainly the procurement, the link to both through the DG Design and the corporate procurement team would be very early in the process. But perhaps, Andrew, would you like to pick up on that?
Good morning. I'm Andrew Hurd. I'm the engineering manager. We do work closely with procurement. Obviously, we're cognizant of the standing orders with respect to thresholds and the various requirements for tendering, quotations, etc. Normal procedure would be for works in excess of £10,000 to initially make contact with DG First as the contractor to see if they have capacity, resource to fulfil the construction of various projects. If that's not the case, we would normally proceed, as I say, in accordance with standing orders, consulting as necessary with procurement. In this particular case, you know, I don't have that information with me to know exactly when that contact and the extent of that was made, unfortunately.
I think one of the things we've been doing the review on procurement, and one of the things we found is if you can get them right at the start of the project, even before design, that's a good time to bring them in so that you can work it up. So I take it that didn't actually happen on this occasion.
The design of this project was developed over a period of almost 2 years. At some point in that process, I would definitely have a conversation with our procurement colleagues around about what's coming forward and more an overview. I'm not aware that they would be involved in the actual design process of the technical side of this.
Is this a follow-up, Jill, or a different follow-up?
Sorry, so I take it from the answers that we've got that the procurement team were not involved throughout the whole of the procurement process, because it sounds to me as if they weren't in at the beginning, and there is a procurement cycle, so you know, from start to finish of a project. And I'm just curious. The project was to the value of 1-point-something million. I mean, I'm just curious as to whether or not, but I'm taking it from your answers that you had maybe a discussion with them, but they weren't involved in the project.
I think there's two parts to this story. I think what I'm saying is that in the project development phase, which I thought was the first part of the question, that there would have been discussion absolutely about the whole programme we're working to. But in terms of the detail of the procurement process and their role, they would absolutely be involved. And perhaps I'll ask Andrew just to talk the detail of that specific element.
Yes, just to give you a brief understanding of the actual procurement process we went through, it's a two-stage process whereby we advertise the scheme for interested parties to come forward with a view to undertaking the construction. We then went into the pre-qualification questionnaire stage, and that is a standard document produced by procurement and undertaken by all those with an interest. There's then a scoring process of that, which is undertaken, and assuming there is sufficient numbers of contractors that meet the requirements of the pre-qualification questionnaire, then they are given an opportunity to tender, and then you go into the pricing stage, and then it's based on cost solely once they've got through that quality check.
I do understand how the process works, but thanks for explaining it.
Councillor Crothers, then another 4 members who wish to speak.
Thanks, Chairman. Excuse me. I think I have to recognise this, like Ian said, there's good points and bad points, and this whole how it actually where it is now and why the reasons we're looking here. First time I heard about this was when it was actually director, Mr. Speedy, he was bringing together a meeting with the 4 local members, and I heard about it, and it was Jack Groomer actually telling me about what was going on. They had real concerns in regards to how it was actually moving on and when it was starting and start dates and other slippage, and. Because of the back of what happened with the cluster working review, I wanted to get an understanding, as being the chairman at that time, was this a council culture, or was it just departmental? Was this doing to the actual or plan environment or even economic development? So I went and I was at that meeting, and at that point it was quite clear, when we had that meeting, it was quite clear that the concerns that were being raised by the local members at the time were very valid. They had real concerns, but what was more obvious, there was no real way to actually get things back, get it back onto the rails and get things running, get things, was it got delivered in time, was it got started in time, was it got finished in time, because of the way the contract manager or the contract had been signed up. And that was one of the things, and at point 3 in particular is where I'm got a point where I think it's a weakness. It's like it says within the report, there's a lot of links between this and the actual procurement review that we're undertaking. I think you touched on them as well, Chairman. Really is a lot of links, and point 3 in the appendices, a review form of tender contracts used for projects to ensure appropriate control over a project delivery, and it goes on how that should be fulfilled. And certainly there was weaknesses there, and there could be improvements that could come through that, and I would imagine that'll come through the procurement review that we're having. With the outcomes of that, we'll be able to identify them. But really, I mean, whenever you talk to MD, whether it's on the street, whether it's the shop fronts, where MD's been involved, there was real concerns over this whole where it started, where it came, how the consultation right through, and that's why I spoke about, and I'll come back to it as other members speak of it as I get another chance, is that it's the next stage. I would like to look further into this. There's not enough detail in this report from me. I'd like to get a better understanding what were members being consulted in at the time, the contracts management. What did that look like? And if we understand what that contract management or that contract agreement looked like, then we can reflect that on the procurement review and how we go forward and make that better in the future. So it's just a few comments that I know to express how I'm feeling about when I read this report. There was a lack of information. It was broad. Certainly wouldn't be up for rubber stamping unless there was a next stage. I would want to really drill into this today, but the level of information just isn't here in front of us.
Take that as points just now, and we'll pick them up. Councillor Witt.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to concentrate on a specific aspect of the project which definitely caused some delay. You may recall that at one stage in the works, an old well was uncovered, and undoubtedly for historical reasons that would necessitate looking at it, and so as always happens when you uncover something of archaeological significance, it raises the question: what records were available? I mean, do we not have records going back a long time? The previous district council, before that the old town council. So, how did we not have access to these records in order that we could that would flag up any possible reason for any delay?
through the design process, every opportunity is obviously taken to look at what information available about the site, and that included doing a full review of what services were charted, and that be generally looking back historically as well. But I think we have to accept that any site of that nature in a historic town centre is going to throw up things that are unforeseen. And to the point where we actually undertook probably more or a high level of due diligence across the whole site, knowing that it was such an important site that there would be significant issues when we started to open up the ground. So this is generally just something that wasn't charted in anything we had, and has to be considered just an unforeseen that we probably did not anticipate, and certainly has caused a slight delay, not hugely significant, but I don't think is going to be uncommon in this type of project.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Following along the lines of previously asked questions, I would like clarity around what preparatory work was actually carried out to identify wayleaves that may have been in the possession either of the council or of the various utility companies, and whether or not the various utility companies were considered. If I watch Time Team on the TV, I see them going across with all forms of technologies to identify what areas need further exploration. And so it concerns me about the preparatory work. I recognise what Mr. Green has said. However, I think we found ourselves wanting in that regard. I'm disappointed in the paper at 3.6.2, where we speak of the day-to-day responsibilities and where they lie. There's no expansion on those who had that day-to-day responsibility and how we could have run up against such an extension to the project as was the case. Another area of concern that I have is that Dumfries is the regional centre, and albeit I'm tired of saying it, I will keep saying it, that Nithsdale Area Committee is deserving of stakeholder status in this instance, are our local ward members, and I believe where it's regarding the regional centre development, which the full council is tied into, that the full council are the ones who should be given that information. And as I say, emphasise Nithsdale Area Committee as a stakeholder, as our local members, ward members. There's mention that it was a standard contract. I wonder what that means, and this goes back to the procurement questions I asked earlier. Is it appropriate in these circumstances to use a standard contract? And what involvement would procurement play in so far as compiling an appropriate contract given the set of circumstances which are unique in this instance? And I don't see that a standard contract is appropriate. So the wayleaves and the exploration of what was held on record by other utility companies may have been helpful. I don't know. I stand to be corrected on that. But I really do need to know more about those who were contracted to oversee the day-to-day operation of the achievement of the improvements of Burnstatue Square, and what their liability is and where that fell down.
If I can respond to your questions around the investigation work that was done prior to commencement of the construction. We hold records of public utilities, gas, water, etc., British Telecom. However, on all of those records, there is a disclaimer to say they're not held liable for the accuracy of these records. So we always know that there's a possibility when we get to site that you know, it's going to be different to what's recorded. And in the case of Burn Statue, that was indeed what we found with a gas main, which meant that we had to relocate the plant positions of some of the trees. We did, however, undertake ground investigation work ourselves. Bearing in mind the operational nature of Burn Statue, obviously wasn't possible to dig extensively. But however, we did do that at a number of key locations where we expected there to be services and where it was important for us to know where they were in respect to the construction. We also undertook a ground penetrating radar survey, which picked up some of the locations of basements, etc. Foundations of some of the properties also gave us some reason for delay in the construction aspects. So it's always a judgment call on how much of that investigation you do. And as I say, we were constrained by the fact that there were buses and obviously pedestrians in the area prior to us going in there and actually starting the work.
So,
Would you like me to go through some of the other points?
yeah,
Or-
if you could.
I think, if I understand the point you're making, Councillor Collins, about area committee and the role in engaging, and I absolutely agree. And I think I've said in the report that I think that they felt that that was a weakness. But certainly, if we, this report, I think this project is reasonably historic in terms of the development phase of it. And one of the things that we have done well, I think, learning from this, but also through service committee, is to properly embed engagement with the area committee on programmes and projects before coming back for final approval. So I think I absolutely agree with you on this project that was not robust and strong enough, but certainly is something that is very much now embedded in our practices.
Thank you. Once again, Ewan, I'm sorry, but you say that you have to embed that consultation with area committee. My point is that it's not area committee where it's the regional centre, it's full council. And the area committee are a consultee, a statutory consultee in that. Absolutely. I've no argument with that. But as the regional centre, it was agreed that that liability and responsibility lies with full council. When it comes to Dumfries and these types of developments in particular. The exploration of groundworks and so on, I fully accept and acknowledge that there can be problems that arise. We're here this morning to learn the lessons, and it's not a case of simply coming to tear apart a report or anything of that kind. It's understanding how best to tackle similar projects in the future. And if we don't learn the lessons from this experience, then we're fools. So that's the basis of my questions in understanding what process was adopted, what worked and what didn't, and what we might do better. Thank you.
I don't know if you could maybe expand a wee bit on the point Councillor Collins made there about regard to the actual standard contract, because I think this is something that's going to inform our procurement review, because the standard contract didn't allow for timescales, etc. If you hadn't used an off-the-shelf contract, but one that was actually designed for this project, would that have helped you to actually deliver on time? Could you have put in areas where you actually you've got a time scale, and if you don't meet that time scale, we could have then ramped up clauses in there to say maybe penalties or something? Could that have been something that if you had procurement earlier, they could have helped you with?
Yeah, the form of contract, the standard form of contract that was used here was the Institution of Civil Engineers Minor Works Conditions of Contract. Within that, and in this particular case, when you run into difficulties and overrun, and the contractor doesn't have, appropriate grounds for that overrun, supposing it was extremely adverse weather, in that case, this wouldn't apply. But there is something called liquidated damages, which is a pre-construction estimate of the client's costs should there be an overrun on the contract. Now, that sum of money was put into this contract, and that sum of money is currently held off the contractor whilst we haven't reached final measurement agreement yet with the contractor. So there is some provision there, should there be an overrun, for the client to claw back some of the additional costs that he will be put to as a result of that overrun. Now, I think probably what's really being talked about here is transferal of risk to the contractor, which would then allow you to put some sort of financial penalty on him in addition to the basic costs. And it's quite clear in those conditions of contract that we used here that it isn't a penalty. It is simply compensation, if you like, for losses. And I think there is a form of contract, the NEC3 new engineering contract, which is fairly widely used. We have started using it. The reason it probably wasn't used in this case is that we're still in a bit of a interim phase of introducing it. But I'm aware that within that you can specify certain risks that will be taken on by the contractor rather than the client. But inevitably, the contractor will be looking to ensure that should that happen, he's not going to be particularly out of pocket. I mean, clearly in this case, it wasn't in the contractor's interest for it to overrun because he's put to additional costs, having his offices, etc., on site. So I do know that there's specific clauses in there, and that needs to be looked at in detail if that's the road that we want to go down.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for that answer. I know that from my point of view and from a number of elected members' point of view, they want to see, and I want to see, procurement at the heart of all of these contracts. And where you have a standard contract, it may well enough suit the starting point as being a starting point for a specific contract basis, and add-ons could be put in there. So procurement, I'd like to see at the heart of the outset of any of these projects, to ensure that legally the council are protected as much as possible and that assurances can be tied into the contract to make sure that that assurance is there for the council, and that that expertise should lie with procurement in being able to feed in at the earliest possible stage with all of the information that's relevant and bring forward in due course then for the winning tender and for putting the tender out, to ensure that everything is included as much as we're physically able to do and consider prior to choosing a preferred bidder, and everybody knows where they stand. So procurement needs to be at the heart of this, and that's where my concern is around the standard contract and the distance that I feel procurement has been from the actual decisions and execution of the project. Thank you.
Councillor Geddes.
Well, I would like to reiterate the sentiments previously expressed by Councillor Collins, Chair, to the effect that the purpose of this report is not to give any council official or group of officials a hard time. That's not what we're here for. That's not the function, the remit, or the role of this committee. It's to look at the processes, to try to identify weaknesses, and make sure, in fact, that these are made more robust and that we perform better in the future. And to that extent, I would commend Ewan as author of the report for what I consider to be a frank report. It's a warts and all assessment, particularly when you focus, Chair, sorry, Freudian slip, that on the section key findings relating to project management. And the big issue, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of that doesn't make good reading. Don't let's delude ourselves. But there were positives. The project was not an unmitigated disaster, and the positives essentially were that, you know, it has improved and enhanced that part of the regional capital. And these are obviously set out, sir, and the section on key findings in relation to the positive outcomes. And I think it's right and appropriate that we recognise that these are positive outcomes. But what really, you know, I want to be assured of is that whether or not what we're proposing in the appendix for the future will in fact, or does in fact, address adequately the key findings relating to the project management here. And I think if we can do that, we will be discharging our function and our remit. Don't let's delude ourselves. This is a harbinger, as far as I'm concerned, of things to come, because I have already been approached by a Stranraer member, no names, no pack drill, sir, saying, in fact, that no, point's been well made, though, that you know, this exercise is taking place, and rightly so, in relation to this project in Dumfries. Presumably, the EEI committee will adopt a similar robust, that's for them to discuss, but will adopt a similar robust stance in relation to certain projects going on at Stranraer at the moment. So that's another reason, as I say, that I use the term, this may well be a harbinger of things to come. And that's, you know, why we've got to get it right. So, as I say, I would like, you know, with agreement of yourself and colleagues, obviously, to focus on the appendix and whether or not we deem as a committee implementing these will in fact address the downside, as it were, of the key findings section of the report. Thank you.
I have Councillor Gilroy.
Thank you. I would just like to ask, you have a project team to take this project forward. Did you have a project manager?
Yes.
You had a project manager from the beginning of this project?
Yes.
So one would have to ask, when you get to the key findings relating to project management, who was managing the project manager? Because whoever was project managing obviously didn't manage it terribly well. So, you know, it all comes down to managing the project, as to whether you get things done on time, you get things up for approval at the right time. What was the thing here at benefit of hindsight, overly optimistic with disruption to business and things. That's all about project managing. And if we're going to do these kind of things, you've got to manage the project well. And so you've got to have the right people in the right place right from the beginning. And it's, I understand the procurement side of it as well, but actually for the people who are being affected by it, it's how the project is managed that affects them. And there were obviously problems with managing this project, and I wondered why. And I rather like Councillor Geddes, I'm not quite sure that we addressed that in the improvements, or what do you call it, the record of lessons learned. Not entirely sure we have addressed that problem in there, and that I think is at the nub of where you do manage a project better. So I'd just quite like to have some information on that.
Well, I think if we consider this from the start of the project to the completion, so I wouldn't just be focusing on the actual contract management on the ground element of it, so the whole project. So this would sit within within Planning Environment Services, some director, but with myself as the head of service responsible for delivery. But then into the regeneration of the strategic projects team, we would have a service manager responsible for delivering the project. And therefore, as the client manager, if you like, therefore leading and pulling together the project team, which would include a number of services at various times, but we're mostly colleagues in DD Design working for us as the client. And that would be the sort of key relationships throughout the whole of the project when we go into that, and that led through the design process and to the contract management element of it. I think that's a bit of a short answer to a bigger question that you raised there around the project management arrangements.
Can I just ask, I'm sure we're going to go to the appendix on records of lessons learned, but where do you see that improving in this lessons learned, that we don't get project development process not adequately robust, weaknesses at level of engagement, lack of clarity in project approval? Those are all things about managing a project that we need to improve on. And I'm not entirely sure that we are really addressing that in the appendix. I would like reassurance from you that you think we are, because I'm not sure that we are.
So thank you, and I understand the second part of your question. Well, I think we do in this improvement plan, and one of the reasons I'd say that is that a significant number of things here we've started anyway, before the completion of this project. And certainly what I think we found that we didn't have, I think the word frameworks used here, fundamentally that the systems in place, the project development briefings, the contract management briefs, they were not, I don't think, robust enough and not standardised enough to reflect good practice. So therefore, things could be called to be a bit more ad hoc in terms of how we went through the process of developing the project. And hence my comment, or the improvement action 1, which is about getting that stronger and putting in proper templates, if you like, that we use. And that would cover everything from what's the aim of the project through to who's responsible, what the budget is, and how we put in the controls for managing that. And certainly also within Plan Environment Services, we've created what we call a strategic projects board, where we have all the senior management together to review projects of this scale that are significant, and therefore agree any course of action we have to agree. I think also the link in there to the wider corporate review of project management is going to be more than helpful, because I think that arising from that will be actually further improvements in our corporate basis, but improvements in fundamental project management skills required and arrangements for ensuring these skills are in place. So whilst the improvement actions in item 1 there haven't all been completed, I'm absolutely certain that the first part has, and that the ongoing development of others will do that. I think, if I may say also, I think the second action there is a fundamental one, and that was about getting a better and more consistent approach of engagement with elected members to take a project from start to agreement to then completion. And I'm convinced that we did not have a strong enough process in place then for this project. Although what I would say is that there was not a recognised process, I think, across the council in terms of how we engage, particularly at area committee level. I think that's a lot stronger now, a lot clearer. And the reason I can put in there that we've completed one of these actions is that the capital programme report for economic development that went to the last EEI committee has an agreed recommendation that area committees and stakeholders must be consulted in the development of projects before the project's been finally approved by the EEI committee for delivery. So that's something I feel we've tightened up very strongly, and as can be seen recently in projects across the region, actually. So these are the two areas that I feel we can act on as a service immediately, and have done so. The other actions, or the other improvement actions, I think what we've said are subject to linking in both in terms of the corporate work that's ongoing, and I think in being more proactive with our communications. I think we were stronger at getting the pre-project information together. That was okay, and certainly that was very strong. But part of the negativity around this project was perhaps not getting lifetime information and making better use of websites and lifetime information to the public and to members around delays and changes to the project.
Councillor Riper.
Thank you, Chair. I think on the whole there is a problem with project planning in the early stages, and maybe communication between different departments and design. I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking back to Brown Hall School, where things were found as the project proceeded, that should we agreed at a previous committee had been highlighted before and included in the project to begin with, not just added on as they were found to be needed to be done. And it ended up Brown Hall School came in twice over budget what it should have done. I still think that has not been addressed by the council. I just very quickly, if you'll bear with me, give you two brief examples. Kirkcudbright Squash Court has suffered flooding last winter. Contractors arrived this week to install a French drain to hopefully stop that happening again. They came to me and asked me what was down certain manholes and what was in an old trench across the road, because they didn't have up-to-date utility plans for the site. Luckily, I could tell them the answer to this, but really, contractors arriving on site somewhere to do a job should be fully informed of what's under the ground when they start digging. Also, a couple of months ago, the work at the Cochrane Hall, 20 tonne of hardcore was put on private land and flattened out to form a works compound, and then it was pointed out that that land didn't actually belong to the council, so they had to go and get a digger and a team of men to come and lift it all again. Once again, lack of communication to contractors that, that land wasn't council land and shouldn't have been used for council purposes. So I think there is definitely something lacking, either in preparatory planning or communication between departments, and I really think this should be addressed.
If it might help, I've been involved in the Short Life Working Group reporting to the Strategic Asset Board, and there's a report going up early next month. I can give you a little bit of information based around the work that we've been doing, whereby we've identified minimum standards for programme and project management, following on from guidance issued by Scottish Government, and it covers sort of 10 key areas in managing any project, such as, the governance aspect, having a robust business case, roles and responsibilities, which has been touched on, just making sure that it's absolutely clear who is responsible. Benefits of the project, risk, which we've talked about, resource management, stakeholder engagement. So these things are all being looked at and being picked up, and I think the difficult thing with that is making sure that those processes are proportionate to the project under consideration, because you need to look right at the outset how complex, how strategic the project is before you can set those standards. So it's a range of them. Obviously, you wouldn't be doing the same sorts of things with a minor bridge repair job as you would be for burned statues. So these are things that are currently being looked at, and the report does recommend that there's further work going on beyond the report itself.
3 members. Oh, Colin, you want back in on that?
Thank you for letting me back in. The things that I'm talking about, projects have obviously been going on for decades, centuries in this country, and what I was touching on there was very basic things that should be looked into in every case, no matter how big or small the project is. You would imagine that plans would be looked at to see who owns what land, where the boundaries were, where the utilities were, etc. And that, to my mind, I'm only looking at 2 very small projects in my own locality. That just doesn't seem to be happening. And I thought these were basic things that should be set in stone in any project. That was that point, and I did forget to ask when I spoke the first time, do we have an idea how far off budget this project is? Is there an estimated final delivery cost?
No, not yet. The project is likely to incur some additional expenditure due to the unforeseen. But as Andrew said, we're working on a final account with the contractor, and that includes the counter side of that, which is the contractual arrangements and liquidated damages. So that's something that we don't know as yet, but would be reported to the EEI committee in due course.
Right. Jill, Ian and Alistair, but if you could maybe give me a wee bit clarity, because it asked for it, under 3.12, there was a lack of clarity in project approval and the mandate to progress delivery of the project. Was that a process that we should be looking at to make sure that we, does that mean, say, members didn't give you the mandate, or is it officers hadn't delivered on delegation? Or where's the issue with that?
Well, I think this is the issue where, leading back to it, was not a strong enough engagement on what you would call final designs with area committee originally, and then up to service committee. But this project came to the then Planning Environment Services Committee for approval. The minute clearly states that officers have the approval to go and deliver the project. I think what then happened as a result of that, though, was there probably still was some ambiguity and some unrest around the formal approval and what was being approved. So my comment there is not necessarily, it's not so much about one thing in particular. I think it's in general that we did not bring enough information, that a tight enough report to give members the fullest information at the time.
I thought it was maybe members had changed their mind halfway through. Right. Councillor Dykes, then Councillor Crothers and Councillor Geddes.
Thank you, Chair. I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Geddes on what he's saying about you bringing warts and all to this committee, because it is important that we actually understand that you've done that, and it's important for us to try and move forward. Obviously, there were huge issues with this particular project, and what we really need to do as a committee is look at how we can prevent that type of thing happening again. So I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. I have issues with what we've got as an improvement plan, really, and how that figures, because I'm still of the opinion that if the council was to follow a procurement cycle from start to finish, including the people who should be there, so that's from scoping right the way through to project delivery and project end, that should involve procurement team people, the contract manager, whoever that may be, from the very beginning of the project. So it should be all the way through the process, so that nobody's coming in halfway through or at the last minute or for just the delivery of the project, because they need to understand the whole process, not just part of the process. And I think that's probably missing from what you've put forward as what we would do moving forward. And I think it's important we do that. Another thing that was said, which I'm unsure that I agree with actually, is it's not about the council winning and basically screwing over the contractor all the time. It's about having a win-win position for both council and the people who are delivering the project, because that's how you get better relationships and better working. So for me, it's about actually trying to get a win-win situation for everybody. And therefore, council wins, the general public wins, and the client wins. And I think that's what we need to be looking at. And if you look at proper procurement, that's what that is. It's not about us being able to claim X amount of money and the contractors out by X amount of money. It's about trying to have a win-win situation. And I think that's missing from these papers.
Councillor Crothers.
Thanks, Chairman. I suppose going back through, listening to everything that's been said, I suppose try to sum it up myself and how do we take it forward? We've one of the real risks to the council was reputational damage. And if you look at the amount of times it's been in the paper and the comments that we made, you could see there's been a bit of reputational damage to the council in the back of this. So how do we avoid that? But there's been from contracts management to procurement process, again, through the simple things that could have been put in place, I think, that could have avoided all of that. And probably one of them has never been touched on is like a day-to-day liaison officer that would have smoothed away. Some of us would call it an Alec Hassel, because that's what quite a lot of the time that's how we refer to Alec. Somebody who really does a good out there, somebody's liaising with business, who should be built into the contract. Should be built into the contract so that person's got 20 or 40 hours, whatever it is, a week for the length of the term of that contract. So liaises with the businesses, the council, the members, keeps everything joined up, all the I's dotted, T's crossed, and everything joined up. So I don't think we had that on that job, and I don't know if it's something we actually specify within a contract. But I think the only way I can feel to take this forward is that either we build it in the recommendations here, that we scrutinise this further, or we use it as a case study. Reports later on in the agenda, we can actually look at different cases and use this as a study at that point and drill further in. Because it goes back to the points that I made, Ken, we have to understand fully what's happened here, then make the improvements on the back of that. Once we fully understand, it's a good report, nobody's denying that, and it's comments similar to what I made used to at the committee with a very robust discussion with Ewan's report there, sign of a good report, and I'll say the same for today as well, sign of a good report, we're having a good discussion over it, but we need to understand, I certainly as a member need to understand this better, because I really do want to see improvements coming for this. Like I say, a simple thing like a day-to-day liaison officer probably would have made all the difference, would have been an extra cost, but everybody would have known what was actually happening and going on at the time, and that communication was a breakdown. So, I mean, my preference is actually to refer it to a later agenda item, but depending on the mood of the committee here today, obviously, and use it as a case study, so we can drill in and use it as further evidence as we go forward in the procurement process, and possibly the commission, but this was in particular, I think, procurement.
Councillor Geddes. Councillor Collins.
Sorry, just on that point, Chair, it was something I referred to earlier at 3.6.2. DG Design, working with input from urban design specialist Gillespie's, provided the design and day-to-day project management of the project on behalf of the client. And I did ask that we get more information on what was going on there, not least because of the overrun.
Do you have any information on that?
Yes, thanks, Chair. DG Design are the ones, the primary interface with the contractor. We undertook extensive communications with businesses, local members, media, etc. as well. We are the ones that undertake the role of designer in terms of the CDM regulations and health and safety. We also have a CDM coordinator who's looking at all those aspects. We are the ones that agree the payments to the contractor. We're the ones that have meetings with the contractor to look at progress. And these meetings were being undertaken on a regular basis. And as part of that, you know, as it was identified that progress was slipping, revised programs were coming forward from the contractor. And that information was then communicated to the various stakeholders on the project. I'm not sure just what else I can say around the sort of roles and responsibilities, but certainly the day-to-day project management lay with DG Design.
Same point, Councillor Dyke.
Yes, just on exactly the back of that. What you've described to me is a contract manager. So was it a qualified contract manager who was on the case? On this particular, was it a qualified contract manager who was that person?
You know, I refer back to the work that's being done for the Strategic Asset Board, and competencies and training is one of the things that has been looked at there. The person from DG Design is a chartered civil engineer, which is generally seen as being a competent person in respect of that. There are obviously areas of project management and specific training associated with that. And for example, Prince 2 is the methodology used within the council in certainly civil engineering contracts. And the person involved in this particular project has had training in Prince 2.
Sorry, so they weren't a qualified contract manager. I hear what you're saying, but I'm just asking the question. They weren't a qualified contract manager. That's what you've told me. Is the answer yes?
I'm not exactly sure what qualification that would be. As I say, a chartered civil engineer is routinely undertaking that work.
Because when I was, it's not so much a project management or the contract management, it was the liaison officer, the point that I was making, which is somebody on the ground, almost like a communication officer that keeps everybody informed. It wasn't about project management or contracts management.
Councillor Geddes.
They will have a protocol for members speaking here in this committee, sir.
If it's on the same issue, I will let them in, but if it's a different issue, I usually have them in order. Councillor Geddes.
I'm obliged to you, Chairman. I'll go back, and I make no apologies for going back to what I said earlier. It's about time. We've been at this nearly for an hour. It's an important issue, and I don't care, quite frankly, that we'll spend the rest of the day at it. But it's about time that we cut to the chase, and that we looked, in fact, at the appendix, which sets out the record of lessons learned. Now, if you go, before you do that, sir, if you go back, as it were, to the recommendations, and you're asked at 2.2 to note the key findings from the officer review and actions detailed in the record of lessons learned. Well, I'm not, quite frankly, Chair, disposed merely to note the actions detailed in the record of lessons learned. I want assured, in fact, that these actions do address the weaknesses which have been commendably identified in the earlier section of the report. And what I would hope, sir, is that we will now do is go through these 5 improvement actions which have been identified, get the assurance, in fact, that these address the defects and the failings which have been, as I've said, commendably highlighted earlier in the report. And if they don't, going back to the point that Councillor Gilroy has made, then I think we make it abundantly clear as to what we're expecting, that is indeed the case. And that, I would like to think, without being didactic to anyone here today, is what we should be doing as a scrutiny committee. And I would move that we do that now, starting it and going through these sequentially from 1 to 5, sir. Thank you.
Happy with that. If we start with 1 then, with the improved project development management processes employed for all projects. The measure of success for the first one is standardised project development framework and templates, processes in place and being used. My only concern with that one was the fact that is a standardised thing when, not always one thing fits all thing. Have we enough scope in there to actually pick things as we require them rather than just a standard form? And is that something that you're actually looking to change so that you have the ability to have more elbow room on contracts, templates, or the actual framework?
Yes, I mean, what I'm referring to here is really what you might call a suite of documents that we use to complete and templates to follow to ensure that the process from inception of an idea through to completion of a contract is in place. And within that, there'll be, for larger projects, there'll be more detail. But I think the standard approach to having what's commonly known as a PID, or a project initiation document, setting out what you're trying to achieve, getting that signed off, getting stakeholders signing off designs, the whole process, getting costs, etc. I think that's all fairly standardised. May change as a result of the corporate review that's going on, but I think what we have in place now is something that's robust enough and adequate at the moment.
So a second follow-up to that was, I notice you're lead officer for this, but is this being done across the council so that all projects across the council have this put in, and are you just leading for your own service on this?
Well, I think in this instance I'm referring probably to the regeneration projects being brought forward by economic development. But I do think, again, this links into the wider review of project management through the Strategic Assets Board, which I think, as Andrew just briefly touched on, is going to come up with a set of recommendations about how we standardise the corporate approach to project management.
Alistair.
Thanks very much indeed, sir. It would have been helpful, Chair, in my view, to have been, for us to have had explained the link-in of these improvement actions, as it were, to the key findings section of the report. Now, can I suggest that as we work our way through these sequentially, that is done by you and Mr. Hell? As they would find it, I personally find that helpful. It would help me to focus on it.
Ian, is it a similar point?
No, it's on that particular point. That's okay. Yep. This is why I personally think that it should be linked to the report later on, and we should use this as a case study, because when When you're reading it, it says standardised project development framework and templates, processes in place and are being used. And obviously, what other that's rather large documents, blah blah blah. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see what's actually happening. And I just maybe that's maybe just the way I work. I like to fully understand. But it does all link into the larger procurement process that's going on, review, I should say, that's actually happening. And that's the point I made. And Alice is touching it there in regards, obviously yourself, just in regards to, is this just for economic development or is it for the whole council? We need to look at that. It's no, this is no, to me, if we look at this in isolation, then it's got to start referring, the two have got to get mixed up and cross-contaminated. We need to look at this as a whole. I think we could possibly be wasting a lot of time going through this. We should be looking at it holistically.
Alistair.
Thanks very much indeed, sir. My view is that, we do go through this and that, we come to our conclusions when we go back to recommendation 2.2, and it may very well be, as Ian has already picked up, it may be that we're sufficiently confident that we should be suggesting, in fact, that this should be applied as a template across the council as a whole. Now, whether or not that's exceeding the remit of the report, I will expect governance advice, guidance and advice on at the appropriate time. But as I say, I think we've got to get through the exercise showing just exactly how these improvement actions relate and link in to the identified weaknesses. And hopefully at the conclusion of that, and your comment, let me say for the record, I agree entirely with the comment that you made in relation to the first one. Once we're satisfied that that's the case, I think we're in a more confident position than I personally, and I can only speak personally, am at this moment in time.
Well, I think Councillor Gade is just reflecting the comments that I was going to make in terms of giving advice to members that this is a particular matter in front of members. You might wish to consider it for the evidence of your own review, but you should deal with this part of the business that's in front of you in relation to this particular project.
That in mind, Ewan, would you like to sort of maybe relate back the findings back to the report to say this is where we're picking up this issue, etc.?
Yes, and apologies, I now see that I could have made a much stronger link there. But in terms of the appendix, in terms of improvement action 1, which is improved project development management processes, from that relates to the report and under section 3.10. The project development process is not adequately robust as a general statement. 3.11, as a result of in terms of the weakness in engagement in developing the design. 3.12, in getting that final sign-off and approval and mandate to progress the project. Now, in effect, so the 3.10, 11, 12 really captured in item 1 there. But 3.12 and 13, I think, are linked to improvement action 2, which is really where I'm saying that we need to get a stronger engagement with elected members during the process to develop a project, and then ensuring that the final recommendation for approval is managed through the referral from the area committee to the service committee, but that the service committee have a strong enough understanding of the project to be comfortable approving it. So that's in terms of action 1 and 2. If I move forward into number 3, which is a review the form of tender.
Just one, Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. At 1, improve project development and management processes employed for all projects. I would like to be assured that part of the corporate approach is that procurement is embedded at the outset, and have that assurance. I think that's essential to have from the outset.
Yes, it's my view that procurement are engaged, and certainly any project we do would be worked through in terms of, well, although we've talked about the standard form of contract already this morning and the potential improvements there, certainly everything we do is managed through procurement in terms of the processes, without a shadow of a doubt. And we have a link officer into our department from corporate procurement who's our main contact for that. And that would be included in the process here. What I'm saying here is that actually the valid question asked at the start by Councillor Dykes, I couldn't actually turn to a document and say exactly when it was done. And I think that's probably a good example of the weakness in not having the documentation there.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. So on the back of what Councillor Collins is asking, then would it be appropriate to put something in there on point 1, where you would put a line in there that would tell us that you would link in with the corporate procurement division at that point in time? Because I think that's fundamentally important. Yes, yes.
That would be through the standard practice, I would think, that you would adopt. And we can also put that into our review that we would expect that across council.
I think I touched on and covered improvement action 2, which was the engagement with elected members in the decision-making process for approvals. Moving forward, number 3, which is a form of tender, that relates directly to 3.14 and 3.15 and 3.16 in the report. And we've discussed the various issues there already, and feel that partly what's being looked at in terms of the corporate procurement review will enable us to look at potential changes to the form of contract that may indeed bring a more effective approach in the future. So that's where I would link into the key findings. And then number 4, sorry, the greater emphasis on the proactive internal-external communications. I think there were some, that relates directly to 3.17 in the report. And improvement 5, I think put in a more generic or general statement here about ensuring that the proper leadership, senior leadership's involved at the right levels across these projects. So that doesn't relate specifically to one of the key findings. It's more a comment about the whole process, ensuring that we have heads of service and director fully engaged, and that and these projects are fully referred to in our business plan and reported as such.
Just with regard to the review of tender contract, how do you deal with the likes of with the benefit of hindsight, overly optimistic timescales, and we have in the other one that the contractor significantly underestimated the time required? How do you make sure that you can actually measure that? I know maybe contract management's the way, but we had a contract manager through the chap. How does he make sure that he isn't overestimating or underestimating the time it takes?
Yeah, the way the contract period for construction was identified in this particular case, as with most cases, is based on previous experience. You know, we'd done the Plainstains project and the 2 phases in Friars Fennel. I think where Burn Statue was different, and again with hindsight, it's the operational nature of it, maintaining access to the businesses. What I would say as well is that, of course, you're looking for the contractor's view and opinion on this. And none of the contractors that came forward to bid for the project raised the timescale as being particularly tight or challenging. You know, it was really only once that, you know, we got into the contract that it became apparent that it was going to be a real challenge to achieve the timescale that was set. So to answer your question about the conditions of contract, I'm not sure that whatever you adopt will necessarily address that problem. You are relying on the experience of contractors plus our own experience in delivering similar projects.
Councillor Geddes and Councillor Dykes.
Well, I think, sir, in relation, Chair, to this issue about that's paragraph 3.14, and I do take the point that Mr. Herd has made. But, you know, it's not the first time I've said to officials in this particular department, and I've said it, you know, to me it sort of applies to all officials in the member-official relationship. Don't tell us what you think we want to hear. Tell us what we need to know. And that way you'll get a proper, robust relationship between elected members and officials based on transparency, veracity, and hopefully mutual respect. That there's no point, and there's nothing worse, Chair, as far as I'm concerned, than you know, an official or officials saying, well, these people are desperate, you know, to get this done, and we'll be optimistic with the timescales that we're given, because all that you're doing there is setting yourself up to fail with all the attendant consequences. That's not what the relationship between, in my view, having said, you know, having been on both sides of the fence, as I say, I see it from both perspectives. That's not what the relationship between elected members and officials should be about. Tell us. Don't come to us, you know, with negative attitudes. You know, appreciate that. You know, elected members take decisions. You know, derelict buildings, for instance. You know, we expect to see that strategy implemented. You know, at the soonest possible time. We expect, as a consequence, to see our officials display a can-do attitude in achieving our aspirations. But in doing that, you know, let's keep it grounded in reality. And if there are statutory constraints and stuff like that, and various other project-specific constraints, for goodness sake, tell us. Then that way, nobody's left looking foolish. So that, as I say, I would like to think, you know, it ties in there as well. And that's one of the big lessons it's learned. Thank you.
Councillor Dykes.
I don't think I really need to add much more to those sentiments, but it's true, we would rather the project was done correctly within the correct timescale. Now that, obviously the council's put a timescale on this, and none of the contractors have come back and said, we don't think your timescale is realistic. That's what you're telling us. However, it would be better from our point of view to know that it was going to take longer and be done properly than people rushing the job through or trying to rush the job through. So I just think I'm 100% behind what Councillor Geddes is saying here.
Councillor Crothers.
I personally think we're labouring on it a wee bit. I've dug holes in the high streets for 30 years now. It doesn't matter when you get in. Again, I've got a lot of experience that comes with that. You'll get in and rip out cables or pipes that the gas board, the water board, electricity, I've said they're over here, and you've used all types of techniques, cable avoid tools, so on and so forth. And they're never where they say they are. They never are. It's their infrastructure. They didn't put that much money into putting plans in where they are. And unless you do a full survey, and in fact, a full survey, you've got as much money trying to locate these utilities before you actually do the job, you're better just picking up as it goes along. The thing that's missing probably is the best case and worst case scenario. What if you do come up against all these unforeseens? What's the worst case scenario? That's what maybe members should be aware of. Because I don't believe for a minute that we should be going to the extent of putting in surveys where we look at every single service. That's part of the job as the contract as it starts and as the job rolls out. But absolutely, I think we're labouring it too much. We should see a best case scenario, worst case scenario, and if you go beyond the worst case scenario, then there's room for criticism. There absolutely is.
With that, been through them all. The only thing, Councillor Crothers, you brought up was the sort of communication day between members, public, etc. Under item 4, do you think there's enough in there that will give you assurance that we're actually going to? I don't think you'll ever resolve the issue, but you'll make it a lot better.
I mean, that again, it's about communication plans and how we actually advertise through social media or in the local. Again, that's not what I was talking about. I was talking about somebody on the ground who does it, whether it's even just for 4 hours a day as part of the contract. So they meet with, if it's a member, so everybody knows what's going on. So somebody says, listen, I think there's an old well in there that might have come up, and we could make something of that, or it could be extended. There's that enough flexibility? So, because we're all human at the end of the day, but it's no black and white, it never ever is. So no, to me, it doesn't satisfy in regards to that. And like I say, I'll probably pick it up through the procurement. I do think with access it's running in tandem with the procurement, and it's unfair for some of the new members. I've been to East Renfrewshire, North Ayrshire. We've done conference calls with Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire. the amount of work we've actually done on procurement is unbelievable, and it's all parallel to this, and that's why I brought that point. It's unfair for the members that are just kind of getting back into place and trying to catch up. Where I think there is a weakness is in point 5, and that's demonstrate the cross-service senior strategic is what I'm picking up, and operational leadership for the major projects. There's no member involvement there. I don't see it out with the committee decision. I think there should be kind of chairs, vice chairs. The senior council should have some kind of oversight in regards to this. That's my personal view. I think there's a weakness there.
Councillor Dykes.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm going to harp on again, but I do think, I know we talk about under number 3, about the corporate procurement review and the form of tender contracts, but I do think we need to mention qualified contract management. It's not mentioned anywhere here, and I do think it's important. And I would like to see it coming in probably either from the start or coming in at 3, but in contract management need to be in at the start. They need to know what the scoping's been right from the very beginning. I do think it's fundamentally important.
And Councillor Geddes.
I would actually agree with that, Chair. I think, okay, obviously depends on the nature and the value, the ultimate value of the contract, but as I say, in appropriate circumstances, I think that's a very valid and very reasonable point, and we should take that on board today. Going back to item 4 and at the point that Ian was making, Chair, as far as I'm concerned, I have no problems with item 4 or improvement action 4. I think that it would seem to me, and that's good coming from a Luddite, I know, but at the end of the day, let's make the maximum use that we can of such as social media. It appeals to a heck of a lot of people. They use it as a medium for exchanging information and views and ideas, etc. Let's tap into that and use it accordingly.
Last speaker, and then we'll try and go to the recommendations. Ian, you went back in?
No, I suppose the only point I did, it was the contracts management. I think Jill's absolutely right when she says that, but we've got almost like a question out on it. What, I mean, I don't actually know what that is, because I would have thought a civil engineer would have been qualified, but you're saying no, so if we could have a wee bit more explanation about that, just exactly what you mean by that, Jill, please.
A fully qualified contract manager should be in at the project from scoping and sit so that they know exactly what the position is, right the way through from scoping, right the way through to the end of the project. Obviously, they don't come on stream to actually do their piece of work themselves until they're further into the project, but they should be on the project board, they should be listening to the scoping all the way through. And I know maybe you don't like this, but contract management is actually a different qualification altogether to a qualified civil engineer or a project QS. It is a specific role which sees the project from start to finish, and it's fundamentally important.
Chair, just to come back, I should have mentioned this earlier, but within the remit from the Strategic Asset Board, one of the specific points there was the required skills and training for project managers. So that particular thing, is likely to be identified what is required to undertake that, if there's anything in addition to what already is held within the council.
Very briefly, I mean, I think a project manager, a good project manager, should take a holistic view of the whole project and should, in that role, be a liaison officer. I don't think we need a separate liaison officer. Project manager should be talking not just to contractors, but to stakeholders as well.
Right, if we move to the recommendations, we've been asked to scrutinise the delivery of the Burn Statue Improvement Project. I think we've given it a good going over and see what issues there were. Hopefully it'll also help us in our review later on, because there's some things in there that we've maybe not heard before in some of the other projects we had, so we can actually put that in. Members happy to agree that we reviewed it or scrutinised the delivery? Yep. And then 2.2, note the key findings from the officer review and actions detailed in the record of lessons learned in the appendix. was mention with regard to the adding in the contract management scenario. Councillor Geddes.
Can I suggest so that we beef that up? We certainly note the key findings from the officer review, but I would like to think that we approve the actions detailed in the record of lessons learned, subject to the various amendments that we've indicated as we've gone along. I always tend to not to particularly like recommendations which consist merely of noting. As I say, let's beef it up a bit and say that we're saying on the basis of this information, on the basis of our questioning, on the basis of the responses that we've got, that we're not only noting the actions detailed, but we're approving them subject to various amendments and adjustments and alterations that we've suggested should in fact be put in these. I think that's our function and role as a scrutiny committee. Sir.
Are members happy with changing that to approve the actions? And have we got a brief summation of the points that we put in, just so that we know for the record exactly what those I think it was 3 or 4, maybe 2 or 3. Lorna?
I'll go through the ones that I've noted, and hopefully members will update me if I've missed anything. I think Councillor Collins had asked about the standard form of the contract. We heard a bit about the NEC3 contract and the potential there, and that this should be considered in terms of being able to provide variation and difference. There's an action there, but I think it needed expanded. Councillor Collins also and Councillor Dykes mentioned consistently about the inclusion of procurement throughout the whole cycle and their involvement from the early inception through to the contract management and completion. Councillor Wiper discussed basic standards on capital works, particularly around utility planning and preparatory planning, which needs to be fed back as well, not just for this, but for other areas. Councillor Carruthers talked about the facility of day-to-day liaison, whether that's through the project manager or a specific post would depend on the individual project itself, but there was a necessity to have much more close contact and communication through that, particularly of high-profile works. And there was a discussion about not only at item 5 in the improvement plan about strategic oversight from senior officers, but also from elected members as well, and how that might be facilitated. And Councillor Dykes at item 3 in the improvement plan required that we were more specific about qualified contract management being in place throughout the project inception and delivery, so that we had the appropriate skills in place for that, and that was to be added.
No, qualified contract management and is different. So qualified contract management is necessary.
Councillor Geddes.
In appropriate contracts, of course.
Yes, of course. I mean, I'm not talking about contracts of £10,000, but I'm talking about contracts of major expense.
If there's no other points on that, could I take this opportunity to thank you and Andrew for coming along. It's been helpful to us, and I hope it wasn't too feeling like we were having a go, but I think we need to ask the questions to find out where the issues are so that we can maybe put them in our, whether it's through procurement standing orders or changing procurement, etc., to make life easier for everyone, and hopefully we get things going in the right direction. So thank you very much for coming along and giving us your evidence today. Right. Now move on to item 5, scrutiny review, procurement, commissioning, feedback from site visits. We've had 3 site visits, and there was the video conference we had with Aberdeen City and Shire. We have this information across the full here today so that everyone can get the benefit of what was discussed. We have also Gillian MacLeod, who will speak to the report if there's anything to add or anything specific you found out that maybe we can add to the report?
Thank you, Chair. I think the only thing to add, in addition to the papers, is everybody we met, all the procurement managers we met, were very enthusiastic and positive. They could see the difference that procurement could make, not just within the council, but to their local economy as well. And that's difficult to convey in a paper, that real enthusiasm that they had. And also the range of skills that they needed within their teams. They had some that were specialists, but they had real customer focus within their teams as well. I think really, apart from what's within the papers, that's all I'd like to add.
I suppose just for my clarity, because I wasn't able to make it, the one on North Ayrshire, where they take contracts over 350,000 to cabinet. Now, is that the contract or is that the tendering process? Do we know? Was that asked?
I'm sorry, I don't think that was asked, but I can check that for you and get back to you.
Councillor Geddes.
Well, I would have to accept, Chair, that I was conspicuous by my absence in relation to these visits, etc. But that still doesn't diminish the value of the comments and the feedback form. And taking the first one in particular, Sir Renfrewshire Council, seems to me that they are far and away from what I've read on this, that they have given this the greatest degree of importance and resourced it accordingly. And on the top of page 19, Chair, when you're talking there about any specific training or forums for elected members around procurement, and talking about the current arrangements allow proper scrutiny of procurement, which used to be tagged on at the end of other committee business. Well, some of us would say that that's sometimes, that's still regrettably the case here in relation to scrutiny and performance management. And again, if we're serious about getting that embedded at the core of the authority, we're going to have to look at the way that we operate in the future. But I mean, that to me is very, 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 very important, because procurement is used by the councils to drive down costs and to drive up the benefits. That, to me, both sides of the equation, and that sums it up neatly and succinctly, sir, as far as I'm concerned. And I think that we might not be able at the end of the day, or even wish or to aspire to a similar setup, in this authority, but we should not lose sight of these twin objectives, and we should be looking, as it were, to sort of tailor what goes on here in such a fashion to ensure, in fact, that we also can achieve these objectives.
I think one of the things also coming through that I picked up was that there are a team. There was it Renfrewshire started with a decentralised system, but they brought it back into a central team to give advice to people who are going out and signing these contracts, etc. I thought that was one thing that came through. And the one from Aberdeen, get back on to Councillor Dyke's hobby horse, it was contract management can save us quite a lot, and I think that's something that we need to look at. It was a good point that she made, and I think it's come through in that one especially. They've actually, was it £1 million, I think, was the evidence. Through good contract management, they've been able to save their councils. So I think that's proven that point that, it's worthwhile doing. Is there any other questions on the report? Councillor Geddes?
Well, again, sir, the thing that's come up, quite clearly to me, and reading through these feedback forms is, the sort of, I suppose, dilemma, for want of a better term, that at the end of the day, do you have a dedicated unit, or do you embed these procurement people in specific departments? And I think there's arguments both for and against that.
Councillor Witts, I was looking at the wrong piece of paper and it didn't have any other name.
That's okay, thank you. I did manage to attend 3 out of the 4 authorities, and as I already said, I was at East Renfrewshire, not Councillor, he's gone, Prentice. Unfortunately, due to the short notification, I was unable to go to North Ayrshire, and I think that was maybe the case with some other people. Looking through the papers, it's obviously clear that the highest PCA rating of all the authorities and by country mile was Renfrewshire, which had a NAC score of 80 vis-à-vis the national average of 56. And that's probably because they do take, I'm not saying the others don't take procurement seriously, but they seem to go to a considerable length to have it embedded, and the head of procurement is in the corporate management team, the officer at the highest level, and that was less so with the others, particularly East Renfrewshire. Although all authorities have a PCA NAC score higher than the national average. It would be interesting to have our PCA rating. That would be something that I'd like to see come forward as a comparator. And finally, although the video conference with Aberdeen was interesting, I think maybe we're measuring something there that's not. I don't think we can draw a true comparison, because, as is said by Craig Innes himself on page 27, the fact that oil and gas, and it's nice to know that there's still oil coming out of the North Sea in spite of what was said recently, it skews the situation up there in that, as they say themselves, the local businesses are more connected to the oil and gas industry rather than the public sector. So they see opportunities there rather than seeking out work with the local authorities, I should say, because it was Aberdeen with Aberdeenshire. So from that ramble that I've given you, I would particularly like to see a PCA rating for our own authority. Maybe that could come forward. Thank you.
That information should be available because we've had it to committee in a previous evidence session prior to your taking up position on committee. So if we could get that back out, please make sure everyone has a copy. If I recollect correctly, it's 50 or 52%, somewhere about there, or however they mark it out. And the evidence we were given was, depending on how much you use the national contracts, that can affect where you are. So we try and get as much out locally to our local contractors, and that's maybe why we're not quite as high as the rest, but I think we're above average. You have to be above 50 to be conforming, so we are achieving that. But we'll get that information out to the new members. Right. Councillor Dykes.
Thank you, Chair. I too didn't manage to make it to a number of the visits. However, I am particularly interested about page 19, at the top of page 19, when it stipulates that they have actually given their councillors some training on the procurement, and I actually think it would be a very valuable exercise. Now, I'm not talking about a huge training session, but I am talking about maybe the procurement cycle, and so that councillors can understand what that cycle looks like. And I personally think that would be of benefit to members. I don't know how everybody else feels, but I'm not just talking about this committee, I'm talking about all members in the council.
I think that was something we were hoping to bring through in the recommendations in our report when we finalise all our views going forward, but that's something I would like to see in the draft report and procurement review when it goes to full council. Councillor Geddes.
Thanks, Chair. That's maybe what Jill has just said. Maybe it's partially the answer to the first of the two questions I would like to pose. The first one is page 22, so it's in relation to East Renfrewshire. It's the last box, any specific training or forums for elected members around procurement. It starts off by saying there is no councillor involvement and they are not present at tender evaluation. All of the work is done at officer level. Well, I wouldn't necessarily quibble with that, but then it goes on to say, however, training is being arranged in the near future. Now, in the face of that, there's something of a disconnect there. If you're not making use of members and they're not going to be part of the process, why, unless it's along the lines that Jill has indicated, why are you going to train them? That's the first one, sir. And the second one is rather a bit bizarre, you know, I have to say without being disrespectful. It's page 27, it's Aberdeen. Aberdeen City have not had a great deal of success with the hub, fair enough, and are unable to confirm whether the commitments to use, for example, local contractors, community benefit, etc., are successful. Now, I find that a bit surprising that should be admitted apart from anything else. So, you know,
I suppose one of the things put in the context, they've got a deficit of 400 people. They're always looking for 400 people for employment. I think that was part of their, it's thriving to such a high level, the local economy, that it's difficult.
yeah, you know, an amen to that, Chair. But the point I'm making is, you know, they're saying that they're unable to confirm whether the commitments, you know, are successful. That's the point I'm making. You know, I would have thought that they would have been able to produce evidence, you know, to demonstrate that that was the case.
Chair, I think that's referring to the hub, that they were unable to identify through the hub whether or not they were meeting their proposals. And actually, when we took evidence at this committee earlier in the year, it was very apparent that the hub here could not, you know, could not give us the information that we were looking for either, in particular surrounding the likes of apprenticeship schemes, etc.
Just to add a bit more information to that, there is a number of hubs. So the hub in the northeast is a different hub from the southwest hub. And the southwest hub is the youngest, the best description. So the lack of evidence that we had, I think, perhaps shows its age. But I do know there's some issues with the hub in other areas that are more mature and are not necessarily demonstrating fully the benefits expected.
Councillor Gilroy.
Yes, can I just ask that the East Renfrewshire and Renfrewshire both mention a thing called quick quote? And do we do that here? Have we got the ability to do that? Because it seems to draw in quite a lot of local suppliers and to do small contracts and things. And I just wonder, it sounded quite a good thing. And I wasn't at these meetings, so I'm not sure quite what we do in that would be the same. Do we do anything?
My understanding is we use it for very small tenders, but not for major contracts, but for small tenders, and we do use quick quote. But I think that's something, if you want more information, we'll add the further information that Rona's team can provide to you.
It just says that, you know, at East Renfrewshire that, you know, it resulted in around 4 million being spent locally, which is good. You know, it's something to be encouraged. The other thing is that I noticed in Renfrewshire Council that their head of procurement is at corporate management team level. And I think, if I remember, when we had the conference call with Aberdeen, they were the same, were they not? So that brings it up to a level that I think is more recognisable. And I just wondered if we would be doing that as well.
I think that's something for us to put recommendations to full council with, and it might be picked up in the next item. If we see that as the appropriate place, because that was one of the things that we've been looking at through the review, is who's in the team, where it sits, and you know, where they need to be.
So do you think that was something that we could do here? I mean, elevate the position?
I think if members wish to recommend that a senior procurement lead, whoever that might be, is a member of the CMT, then I'm sure the Chief Executive will take account of that recommendation. If that was what you wish to
We could come
forward.
to that in a whatever. Yeah. Simple yes or no would have done.
Well, this is our report, and in item 6 it'll be our findings. So it'll be recommending to full council. So what we feel is what would be in the report. Councillor Crothers.
Thanks, Chairman. I think a lot of things we recognised. I mean, as far as reviewing the evidence, I think there's enough evidence there. And 2.5 it says to consider if any further evidence from councils are needed. But 4.6 it says active members are asked to consider if they wish to pursue further evidence gathering with other councils to consider. Then it goes on to say enough evidence been provided that we're moving towards the next stage, then that's the next stage. You kind of touched on that. I mean, I think that's what is the next stage. If you just outline what actually goes through, I think there is enough evidence personally. I was able to get to all the actual procurement reviews. It was very, very worthwhile. I think we on the back of the evidence that was given, we clearly are, we're under-resourced, under-recognised, as a procurement department, I should say, under-resourced, under-recognised, there's lack of member involvement, there's no real recognition through the committee structure within the council, how it takes place, how it goes forward, the benefits to the local economy and the savings to the council. We didn't really see them the way other councils certainly do, are performing at a higher level. So that was all evident within the information that we gathered through these different evidence sessions with the different councils. So it's what is the next stage? How do we move forward from here? I personally think in regards to 2.5, we have had enough evidence sessions from council.
My understanding at the last workshop, you brought up some issues with regard to the tender process. So to get that evidence, it's either in 6 or 7, I think. Those have to just be fed in. I think it's December full council we're looking to report. So our findings will be, once we've got the final couple of bits of evidence that we'd asked for at the workshop, that will then feed into the final report that goes to full council with our recommendations. But that will be coming back before December here for us to make sure that the recommendations are in line with our views. Councillor Geddes.
Yes, it was interesting, Chair, to read about the tension on page 29 in the context of Aberdeenshire, the tension between standing orders, as it were, and the lawyers, or the governance people as custodians of the standing orders, and those, in fact, who would, on occasions, sort of depart from them. I was apprenticed many years ago to a solicitor whose attitude was that you had to know the law before you knew how far you could depart from it on occasions. And I must admit, reading that, it did I did hear his voice. But having said that, it's all very well, to sort of be flippant about it. But there must be certain standards, minimum standards of integrity and transparency, and we cannot afford to depart from these. By all means, let's operate, Chair, with as light a touch as possible, cut down the bureaucracy to the maximum extent possible, but always appreciate that there is, there are certain standards, minimum standards, that we should not even be contemplating moving away from. I'll leave it at that.
Right, if there's no further points, members have been asked to review the evidence from Renfrewshire. Happy with that? East Renfrewshire, North Ayrshire, Aberdeen City Council. Yep. And consider if any further evidence from these councils or further site visits are required. I think the feeling was that was enough and no further evidence required. However, there were some recommendations with regard to corporate management level. Can we keep them till the next agenda item, and we can feed that in, because that will be the draft report that goes to full council, and we can deal with them under that. With that, we'll move on to item 6, which is Scrutiny and Performance Committee draft report on procurement review. This report presents the emerging findings and recommendations for the first stage of this review. Liz, is there anything you wish to add?
Just to highlight that this is very much an emerging report, so you'll have another look at this at the workshop in November, and then your next committee on the 8th of December. So just, this is your work in progress, and we have captured in the emerging report some of the recommendations and the issues that were discussed at your last preparatory workshop, drawing on the evidence that you've heard over the last year or so. Perhaps just to highlight under 3.5, you had identified a number of additional evidence sessions. None of them involved other councils, which was the report just immediately preceding this one. But there are other areas that you wanted to look at, the council's tender process, and we'll add in a specific reference to quick quote just to give that clarity about when and how we use it. Speaking to a private sector company about the arrangements. A little more information about how procurement and economic development work together to support local businesses, and some further information about the Council's procurement improvement plan. That'll pick up when Rona Lewis came to you and just gave you the PCA score and some headings from the improvement plan. And I think at the last preparatory workshop, Rona had said perhaps it would be worth now just going in a little more detail about our improvement plan to give you that understanding and assurance about what work is already planned. So you'll see from the appendix, we've recorded the evidence that you've already taken, the analysis, the initial discussion you had during the workshop, and just for each of the objectives, some of the emerging recommendations that are coming, like looking at the status of the procurement manager, like looking at the component of the team.
Councillor Dykes.
Thank you. When Rona Lewis comes to give us an update, is it possible for this committee, I know that we put 2, I think, new additional graduates into the procurement team in some shape or form, I think we did. I would like to know, as a committee, what that has done for the procurement team in any shape or form. You know, what have they done, and what impact has that had since they were appointed? I just would like to see what pieces of work they've been doing and what they've discovered while they've done those pieces of work.
Councillor Geddes.
Page 37, so the very top of it, not for the first time in these papers, the virtues of the approach taken in the zero waste contract by this council are extolled. As someone who, with the other 8 Wiganshire members, have had to grapple with various aspects of zero waste contract over the last several weeks, I'd be interested to hear and have a brief synopsis of just exactly what these virtues are, you know, that are mentioned. I appreciate Sir mine are more from the operational aspect, but I'd be interested nonetheless.
I think when we got the evidence on this, it was based on the actual development of the site for the the actual procurement of that site and how we built it and stuff like that, not the rollout. Because I did say I found it a funny one when we couldn't get a zero waste. We couldn't get a tender, I think, from anyone for the actual delivery of the bins.
Well, grateful as always for your response, Chair.
Right. Councillor Crothers.
Chairman, I've not got so much to say on this one. I think it's just a typo, just for clarity in regards to page 40 is one thing. The very bottom box, investigation timetable, and it just, the timeline's at the bottom correct, which says amend scope December 13 to phase 1 site visit interviews June 13. September. Are they correct?
We had our very first evidence session, would you believe, in June 2013. So that's been the period that we've had the sessions throughout. We've been at it a while.
Well, that's what I just wanted to make sure. I mean, I suppose as I was going through this, I'd lost a lot of the thread of this. I'd always been on the committee, but because of the time gaps, and sometimes I couldn't make committee, sometimes I couldn't look with the procurement that I could. In regards to page 43, a couple of bullet points near the bottom where it says, it's in regards to contract management, and that was identified that improved contract management was cited as being a key development areas in other councils. It goes back to the item number 4, and I said, well, this recurrent theme comes in, it's a very, very important point that's been brought up, and there's a mixed approach to the member involvement procurement. Renfrewshire Council, for example, has found a very close involvement with elected members. It's important that procurement is not just about buying as well, is another point, and that's come up again and again and again through item 4 through to now. And I think, Ken, as we go forward, I'm just only picking up this because this is the points I was trying to pick up on earlier. I think we will cover all these points from earlier. It's very, very relevant, very important. But no, other than that, Chair, no really questions other than I thought it was a typo because it is a factual typeline. We have been on it for nearly 18 months.
Councillor Geddes.
Thanks, Chair. Penultimate paragraph on page 45, sir, sets our somewhat puny efforts in quite stark comparison with what's taking place elsewhere. Our procurement team is made up of 1 procurement and commissioning manager, 5 procurement officers who are embedded in the departments, and that's the issue I alluded to earlier. That's not necessarily, to me, the best model, but obviously that's something that we'll develop as we go on, with support from a half full-time FTE administration officer. In contrast, in comparison to other councils, the status and profile are not as high. Well, that's a masterly understatement, and I think there's a lot to play for here, and we should really be recognising that and developing that as part of our ongoing recommendations.
Okay. I've got Councillor Collins and Councillor Gilroy.
Officer in, it makes a difference to the zero waste project on page 45.
Yeah, I think that's the evidence that we need, that if we are putting procurement officers in, it's making a difference. Councillor Collins.
Just for my education, I would like to have a definition of open book and what exactly is meant by open book as cited in this paper.
Get that information.
When we're having the follow-up session and Rona Lewis is coming to go through some of the detail with you, we can get the specific detail about that for you.
Councillor Witts.
Thank you. I wanted to mention what's said on page 46 about Objective 3 and how we support local private businesses, and relating back to the previous item, and it was interesting that we could take examples from there. And the statement on page 46 says the businesses are disillusioned by what they perceive to be a bureaucratic process, but the advantages of dealing with a local authority should perhaps be highlighted, as they seem to be in Renfrewshire. For example, you will be paid on time, and therefore you can plan better. You're not going to be left hanging on for to get your bill. You're paid. And also, an interesting thing that was said about Renfrewshire was they have a shop, I think, Invest in Renfrewshire, and people can pop in and see what opportunities are there. And sometimes people don't even realise it's connected to the council. So that might be a good thing, in that if they're not very keen on dealing with the council because it's bureaucratic, they go there and, well, then that's business created for the local economy, work created for local businesses.
I think that was one of the things that did come through, how we actually work with our local economic partners, the small to medium enterprises, and how we can do that. I think there was examples in our evidence sessions that, especially East Wren and Renfrew, that they engage quite a lot, so it's maybe something that we can pick up. That's maybe one of the recommendations that needs to go to economic, EEI, just call it EEI, get it wrong, through the council. That's one of the ones. I think today we've sort of possibly guided you in some of the areas that we'd like to see, some more the location of the team, the size of the team, etc. There was another procurement model, a review of that, and that'll be coming through. So maybe add that in as well. Councillor Collins.
Thank you. Just with reference to the size of the team and comments already made by Alistair, and quite justifiably so, in the small number of the team, does, however, the procurement department have the authority to request the support of expertise from other departments within the council, so that at least they're able to grow, at least on a temporary basis, for the purposes of executing any work that they have to deal with, and having the pick of the brain, shall we say, out there to support them in taking that forward, at least as an interim measure.
That can be put in as well, that we share resources where we can across the council to make sure that the best people are in the right place at the right time.
But I think it's important that the procurement department are recognised council-wide as having that authority to make that request and have it fulfilled.
There was also mention earlier of early involvement of the procurement team in projects and early involvement of contract management in projects. So I think they'll be picked up and they'll come through in the emerging recommendations. Any other points? Councillor Crothers?
The points that I picked up on when I was out on the visit certainly was the procurement is under-resourced within Dumfries and Galloway Council. It's not recognised to the family tree structure, you could say, within the council at the right level. I think it's too low. It needs to be at CMT. That was one of the things I think certainly it should be up there. Member involvement's probably light. It should possibly be a committee. That's something that certainly should be looked at. Or even when it comes to actual award of contracts, senior councillors should possibly able to present themselves at that point if they so wished. That was certainly where I think it was Renfrewshire Council, that was the case, or East Renfrewshire. I forget just what it was. Benefits to the savings of the council and the local economy was absolute paramount. That was quite clear. Something that did actually come across the PCAs, the ones that were really highly successful at PCAs had a high level. Weren't bothered with PCAs. They were bothered with community benefit, the local economy, the savings of the council. That's what was quite clear was important. PCAs wasn't everything by any means. One of the councils actually started with a negative-based budget, which hasn't been really talked about at all. And I thought, should we actually look at that? They started at minus 400 or £450,000, and they had to create that saving to pay for the staff before they actually, and always turned a return. There was a positive at the end of the year. So I mean, that's something, should we actually look at that as well? I think that was something that hasn't been referred to. If we're talking about this, if I'm getting this right, and this is developing the emerging recommendations to be considered, so if this has got to be in the body of the report and what we consider in December, I think it's essential we do consider some of them. That was the main things that I certainly took from, again, the visits that I had and considering looking back on reflection. There was other bits, but contracts management was absolutely one of the things that came again, the involvement right from an early stage, and that's been picked up quite heavily, so I suppose that's already been noted. But that was the main point, Chairman.
I think a lot of these points have come through the review. They're sort of in the emerging recommendations with regard to like the establishment elected member forum for it, so there's something in there to actually look at. Can we take it that the points that everyone has made today will be recorded and they'll be fed into the emerging reviews or emerging recommendations, and then when it comes back we can make sure that we've ticked all the boxes as we want to go forward. Remember, we've got a workshop 20th of November. We can do it through that, and we can get time to actually make sure that there's something there that we want to add that isn't as robust as we feel it should be. We can do it then. All right. With that, are we ready to go to recommendations? Yes. Consider the findings in the appendices. Had a look at those. Note the further evidence identified as required at the preparatory workshop. That was 2 points under 3.5, I think. And to develop the emerging recommendations to consider further at the December meeting. Move on to item 7, which is the scrutiny review on procurement and commissioning actions and next steps.
I think this is just a summary of the evidence that you've had to date and the next steps, and we'll obviously add in the further evidence sessions that you've just agreed to have at the over the coming weeks.
Councillor Riper.
It's just for the committee's information. I've been looking up the quick quote on here, and it is actually a public contract Scotland service. It can be used. Our policy is anything under £3,000 is 3 telephone quotes.
Pattern members happy to note the progress and action taken on the procurement commission scrutiny review and review and agree the next steps. I would happy with the next steps as detailed in the appendix. Move on to item 8, Performance Management Development Plan Progress Update. We have here an update on recent activity and plan next steps to take forward improvement to our performance management arrangements. Liz?
Thank you. You'll recognise much of this report from previous report that you had about the Council's Performance Management Action Plan. And since then, you've had your first scrutiny review on performance information for the Council's priorities. And there have been another couple of actions that we have been required to take because we have a new approach to Covalent, the information tool. So in Appendix 1, we've simply set these out in one place for you so that you can see how they all fit together and just identify the interlinks for you. And so what we've brought to you is really that consolidated plan so that you can see everything together. And in 3.7, we've identified what the sort of next steps are going to be, what the priority areas are going to be. So it's seeking your agreement that that's the 4 things that we're going to concentrate on in the immediate future, and giving you that overview of performance management activity in the appendices.
Councillor Geddes.
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. It's Appendix 1, sir, the second thematic heading, developing our elected members' roles. 2.5, that's a rather polite way, I think, of saying what some of us have suspected for a long time, improved dialogue between area and service committees. I often feel that the dialogue such as it exists at the moment is dialogue of the deaf. And I say that as being someone who's suffering quite badly at the moment. So it's, but seriously, I think that, you know, there is not anything like the dialogue between service and area committees that I personally feel there ought to be. I think too often area committees, and I'm thinking specifically of my own area committee, are regarded in certain quarters as little more than an irritant. And that is wholly, you know, that's wholly unacceptable. And that's not only my own perspective, that's the perspective of colleagues, you know, who also serve on that area committee. I'll leave it at that, Chair.
I think one of the other points that you brought up earlier comes under 2.2. There was reference to the sort of procurement process, but I think under 2.2, the box there, encourage time to scrutinise performance at committee meetings. I think that was one of the things we brought up in the past, whereby I think there is a feeling of, you know, can we move on to the next agenda item? And if you're seen to be asking a lot of questions, in my view, you're scrutinising, asking the appropriate questions. However, some people feel it's just treading water for the sake of it. Councillor Geddes.
I'm grateful to hear you say that, sir, because my comment and the box on that one, for want of a better term, and I deliberately didn't raise it, was that's a laugh. You've said it more politely than my comment.
Ready to go to recommendations if there's no further points. We're asked to note the progress made in delivery of Performance Management Development Plan, Appendix 2. Agree the priorities for future activity as set out in 3.7. And note that updates on progress will also be reported to Policy and Resources Committee as part of the Chief Executive Service Business Plan. Move on to item 9, Public Performance Reporting Review and Update. This report presents details of our current public performance reporting and future arrangements. Members of the committee will recall that this work relates to the scrutiny review on performance information, which we completed earlier this year. Liz?
Yes, you'll see in the appendix a very detailed approach to what we're doing to improve our position against the advice that we get from Audit Scotland. They do this national overview and they tell each individual council where you need to improve. And in a recent development, they've been telling councils, who's got a good approach to each of these individual actions. So we've gone through that in detail, and you'll see here what we're planning to do. Some of it is corporate activity, some of it is with individual services. So this is informing you that that's our approach that we're taking, and giving you the assurance that these issues are all in hand and that services and ourselves are taking action to address them. The other section of the report is to bring back for you some of the feedback that we had on the broadcast survey, which we undertook last year. Now, you'll see that the response rate is very low, which traditionally is for something of this kind, where it's a general opportunity for people to feedback, so it's certainly no different to other councils who've had this sort of survey. But nonetheless, the findings are of interest to us, and certainly ourselves and the communications unit are using that information to adapt our future approach. And again, in paragraph 3.15 specifically, we've identified the 4 actions that we're taking to progress our public performance reporting arrangements.
The members, Councillor Whitson and Councillor Geddes.
Thank you. You can indulge me, Chairman, as a new member. Appendix 1 and the examples of best practice. What are the criteria for making with how were these comparator authorities selected, or was it? I'd just like to understand the rationale behind that. I'm on a steep learning curve here.
Audit Scotland do publish what the criteria is. I'm happy to share that with you. It's quite detailed, but it does include things like how easy it is to read something, how easy it is to find something. Do you use comparative information with other councils when you're publishing your performance? Do you have trend information going back a number of years? There's a number of criteria that Audit Scotland have that they check against your publications and your information to see if you're providing that to members of the public.
Councillor Geddes.
Thanks very much, Chair. I would have to say, sir, that I find this a disappointing report. When you compare, for instance, examples of best practice, I think we're mentioned essentially twice, and that in relation to a significant number of other authorities who have probably mentioned more than that. And it seems to me that this is yet another area of the council's activity that we're going to have to improve our performance on. And when you take it and couple it with the report which is going to the twice postponed housing subcommittee tomorrow about housing options, etc., we've got a lot of work to do. I mean, my own view is maybe naive and simplistic, but I think you've got to have the aspiration. I would like to see this council being regarded as I'm sure we all would, as an exemplar of good practice in everything it does. And when you get, when you read reports like this, and particularly as I say, as tomorrow's papers, you realise that we have a long road still to travel. And on occasions it can get a wee bit dispiriting as well as disappointing. Forgive me for being so negative.
I would agree with Councillor Geddes in terms of where we are against the comparators with Audit Scotland. Audit Scotland have gave us this information through the summer in relation to reporting from 12-13. So it's 2 years behind where we are just now in terms of real time and the work we've done, but in the spirit of the work that we've received. And also the view that paper reporting of PPR, such as broadcast, is not necessarily where they expect us to be in terms of reporting. They expect it to be on websites and information accessible electronically. So the shift that we've been making over the last 2 years since this data was published is part of the time lag in that.
That's certainly reassuring, sir, but the quicker we can get that information out, to the 47 members, into the wider public domain, the better, please.
Councillor Dyke.
Thank you, Chair. Just obviously following on what we've been discussing already this morning, I just thought number 1.5 on procurement was quite interesting. That was all.
Councillor Gilroy.
Yes, I'm just looking at the very first one, 1.1 on page 79, where it says, it's to do with responsiveness to communities. And that is a damning comment there, that we pay absolutely we do nothing with any consultation or customer feedback exercises. And I just have to ask, what the point in doing them if we're not going to tell people what we got out of them and how we reacted to those that information? There must be a cost involved in just doing the consultations and so forth. And I would have to say, I think it probably resonates with lots of people and communities out there who feel that they've been consulted, but nobody has taken any notice of their opinions. And I just think that is something we really need to improve upon. I mean, I noticed that Dundee, for instance, uses a we listened, we acted format, which would seem to be relatively simple, and I don't know quite why we couldn't implement that in the future as a means of telling communities what happened when we consulted with them, because I think it just disappears, and it's not really good enough. Or there's no point in doing the consultation in the first place. I have no problem with not consulting people if you're not going to use it. I mean, the point of consulting is people think they have an influence in what you're going to do, and if that is not going to happen, there's absolutely no point in doing it. And if people can't see that by being consulted something has happened, or it hasn't happened for whatever reason, then they realise that actually their voice is important. It's just a PR thing, but it should be done.
But I would hope that would follow on from what Lorna said, that actually we've moved on from the position we're at, and we are actually getting a format where we are, whether it's Dundee's one of we listened, we did, or whether there's another evidence way of doing it, I'm not sure.
You will perhaps be aware of the budget consultations over the last year, that there has been a very clear approach in the website, which is what the feedback was, what we've done with it, and making sure that anyone who did give us feedback has been given that. The point here is about reporting back to the people who gave you the information. So it's not that services aren't using the feedback to make changes. It's about our public reporting back to them about what we've done and how we've done it. So that's where the improvement needs to be. And certainly there is work going on in community and customer services about making sure that our commitment to the national standards of community engagement is indeed followed through every single one of them. And one of these standards is about feedback and reporting and that. So it's that end stage that we need to get better at.
Councillor Whiteburn.
Thank you, Chair. It's just touching on 1.1 Councillor Gilroy brought up. I mean, there was actually quite a bit of documentation going around community councils that you said we did, which to me is fine, but I would actually really prefer that information to be electronically sent around, PDF documents, whatever. You know, the less this council spends on printing stuff, to my mind, the better. I mean, in this day and age, everyone has email, everyone has access to council website or whatever. So, I mean, the information was there, and not on all consultations, but it could be in all consultations, the results of consultations, but preferably electronically, then it's not costing the council a fortune sending out leaflets. My other point was in 1.5 on page 82, there's little or no reporting on relation to performance on procurement. Procurement activities may be mentioned, but there's lack of measures. I don't need to read it all out, you can all read. I think that more information needs to be out there. Whether people go looking for it or not is up to them, but the information should be there to, as you know, as for instance, the Burn Statue contract, who won it, how much the contract was for, so it's open and transparent, it's public money, and they should have access to how that money is being spent, to what contractors, so that they can see at a glance. There's no ambiguity, there's nobody coming in saying, oh, that guy gets all this work, how come X doesn't get any work. If the information's out there, the public can decide for themselves what they do with that information. And if they've got any accusations to make, I mean, we've probably all heard it in the pub or whatever, oh, X gets all the work because his brother works in the council, or Y gets all the work because he goes shooting with such and such a person. It happens all the time, but the information needs to be available to people so they can make their own minds up.
Councillor Geddes. Councillor Collins.
Thank you. And on the question of best practice on consultations, I would like to see a single officer point of contact within the council that gives the appropriate guidance to the various departments when any form of consultation is taking place, so that we do have that consistency of delivery and that consistency of response on the back of the result of the consultations. I think we lack that consistency, and we fail ourselves when we lack that consistency and a consultation goes out that's totally inappropriate. I would cite one, for example, initially I had some difficulties regarding a consultation that was being delivered to people at the door of the supermarket between the health board and the council. And when I initially made inquiry, I was here in the council, I was advised that basically it was the health board that was running it. But the council's, Dumfries and Galloway Council was in the bottom of the questionnaire alongside the health board. We had just as much responsibility there as did the health board, and we shouldn't be abdicating responsibility. We should be knowing what's going on in our name. But I think that would all be assisted by a single point of contact who has the expertise and knowledge in terms of giving guidance to any department that wants to carry out and ensure that they're carried out according to best practice.
Yeah.
Just a quickie, it's in regards to the appendix itself and how it's set out. It states, suppose just come back to the beginning, Dumfries and Galloway, it states in the very first page, page 79, top of there, just to bring it into context, in the Dumfries and Galloway box, it says partial in regards to the response, first then yes, then there's no's and yeses. It doesn't actually say what the yes, partials or no's are for. You can assume what they're for, but it doesn't actually explain why. Take it we're adhering or not adhering to. And go back to it's 18 months out of date, so it you've got to reflect on that a wee bit. But actions required to improve. We hope you've seen almost nothing in them boxes, but they're still quite full. So they were 18 months, it's out of date, but there's still a lot of actions required. If you could bring that into context as well, please.
On page 75 of the report, it explains what those descriptors are. Sorry, about yes, partial and no, that Audit Scotland have assigned.
Ian.
I suppose just in regards to the second point I was making, just it's 18 months out of date, the information, but still a lot of actions required, I think, and just to bring that into context. Are they fully up to date? Maybe they're not. Maybe there's still a lot of actions being required.
I think the actions in the box there pick up the final things we have to do. A lot of the issue is about their information being accessible on the website and being able to navigate that information and find it easily. So a lot of it's not about the information per se, it's about making it available on the website around PPR. So part of this is about remedying it, and also the update to the covalent system, which will enable us to produce that almost real time onto the website.
No further hands up. Move to recommendations. Members are asked to note the results of the assessment of our 2012 public performance reporting carried out by Audit Scotland and the improvement actions that are being carried out as detailed in Appendix 1. 2.2, note the findings of the public feedback on the Council's public performance magazine broadcast as detailed in Appendix 2, and consider the actions on future public performance reporting arrangements as detailed paragraph 315. happy to note and approve the actions detailed at 3:15. Thank you for that. Item 10, any other business? I have no other business. Can I thank all members for attendance? And just to let you know, our next preparatory workshop is on 20th of November. I look forward to seeing you then.